Design Program Preview Hour. And as you're coming in, I'll invite you to search for the chat window in Zoom. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, there is a in-webinar chat, which I'm going to put a message in right now, just so you can see where it is. Hello. Hello, world. And as you're coming in, just go ahead and type hello and maybe tell us where you're from. Yes, from Chicago. Rich is from Chicago. Make sure that you are using your drop-down menu to select all panelists and attendees. So there'll be a little to panel in the chat text input field, and you can choose all panelists and attendees if you'd like your message to go to everyone in the webinar. If you'd like to direct your response or your question just to panelists, then you can select all panelists. Anyway, we're a little bit before the top of the hour, so we're just kind of going to vamp here for the first few minutes while people join. And then we'll start with some housekeeping things, and we'll do introductions, and then we'll get started pretty much right off the bat. Looks like you got people from Austin. Ethan's from Southern Illinois. How's the weather there in Illinois right now, Ethan?
Oh, it's beautiful.
Oh, that's nice. It's really good here too. I'm in the Twin Cities. Hey, Angela's from Minneapolis too. Okay, we have someone from the Netherlands. I am not going to try to pronounce that name. Nijmegen. I said I wasn't going to pronounce it, and then I did. I hope that gave everyone a laugh. And we've got Jill from the Twin Cities. It's beautiful here in the Twin Cities right now. It's kind of, it's teasing us with spring, and the snow is melting, which is nice because it's warm out. Jan's another Minnesotan from Burnsville. Hello, welcome. Yeah, the nice thing about spring is that it gets warmer, and we have a long winter in Minnesota. Another Minnesotan from St. Cloud. But yeah, the other problem with that is that it starts to melt everything and it gets really mucky and icky. So it's a mixed blessing, perhaps. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. We've got about a dozen or so people coming in. So we'll get started in a minute. Usually takes a few people some time to drift in for the first minutes of a webinar. But as we go ahead and get started, I'm just going to share my screen really quick and let me know in chat if you can see the cover slide for our presentation today. It says Design Program Preview Hour. If you can see that okay, please type yes in chat. Yes, awesome, great. Okay, it looks like people are saying they can see it. Perfect, thank you so much. Okay, great, so we won't be spending much of our time in PowerPoint today. Ethan has a great demo for you that will also be in Storyline. He's gonna walk you through some examples of high quality performance-oriented or performance-focused e-learning. But we do wanna just kind of give you an overview of our program and where we're headed with the Allen Academy. And that's where we're gonna start after some introductions. So it looks like mostly everyone has figured out the chat window. If you haven't already, or if you just joined in the last couple of minutes, I invite you to use the chat panel now and just tell us your name, tell us where you're from. If you'd like to, you can brag about the weather if it's nice where you are. And if you'd like to, if you haven't already, maybe just a quick note about what you're hoping to get out of today's session. So go ahead and use the chat panel to do that now. And while you're doing that, take a moment to change or to set your chat panel to all panelists and attendees in the chat dropdown. So you can see from the screenshot here, there's going to be a little option to change a dropdown to all panelists or all panelists and attendees. And if you'd like your message to go to everyone in the webinar, then you select the second option, all panelists and attendees. Now, if you'd like to just send something to all panelists, then you can just set it to all panelists and it'll go to Ethan and myself. All right, of course the weather is nice in California. I am not surprised, Scott. That is good to hear though. Okay, all right, so let's take a couple minutes just to answer these questions in the chat panel. If you haven't already, if you're new, if you're just dropping into the webinar, we are getting started with some housekeeping and then we're gonna do some introductions and we'll get right to it. So it sounds like Jill is looking to develop new employees on instructional design. Yep, that is a common request we get for people who are coming to the Allen Academy, trying to transition from classic educational methods to more e-focus. Yep, that's a good one too. It's not as we all know, and as we're hoping to practice and to learn, it's not just about taking presentations and putting them into e-learning, right? You have to come up with a good learning experience. That's in a completely different setting, and there are some unique challenges with that. But Ethan will be talking about a little bit about how we can do that. Okay, yes, guidance on creating for the modern learner. Sounds like at least across the U.S. The weather's pretty nice. I hope things are also pretty nice in the Netherlands. So let's go ahead and get going. Before we leave this slide, I just want to mention that everyone will be muted today except for Ethan and myself. If you have questions, please go ahead and just type them at any point in the chat window, either to me, to the panelists, or to the whole audience, and I will queue up those questions for Ethan to answer throughout the session. We will be also looking to end a little bit early, not end the webinar early, but end the presentation a bit early so that we have a few minutes for just open Q&A at the end, and we'll let you know when that starts. So that's how we're going to handle Q&A today. Now, the we on the phone on the webinar today is myself, Ellen Burns Johnson. I'm a senior learning experience designer and innovation evangelist at Allen Interactions, and I've been doing some support and coordination for the Allen Academy as we've launched this program and this offering. Ethan Edwards is a senior instructional strategist for Allen Interactions and is our dean and an instructor for the Allen Academy. So we are following his torch as we're going forward with this new academy, and really glad to have him on the webinar today. So Ethan, let's hand things over to you and start maybe with a little bit of an overview about the academy and what we're hoping to accomplish with it.
Sure. Well, thank you, Ellen, and welcome everybody. It's really always a thrill and pleasure to be able to connect with people who are trying to do the same thing we are, which is create really outstanding training and performance change, particularly in the technology area. Anyway, just where we're coming from, Allen Interactions has always been dedicated to sharing information, hoping that we need to improve everyone across the board. And so we've always done a lot of training with tools and with design and so forth. And this academy is a new manifestation of that mission that we've had for 25 years. But we just have realized that we really need to formalize a way to help people, professionals, become much more competent at creating great e-learning. Because unfortunately, an awful lot of really bad e-learning continues to be turned out. And it isn't that hard to do it well. It's just that there's a lot of things working against us. And so, the tools are shifting. We have a few good tools, Captivate and Storyline, that are really predominant in the marketplace. And people need help figuring out how to use them powerfully. Because while they can do a lot of people are not really reaping all the benefits of interactivity. And we really want to make sure that the new skills are applied to actual organizational problems. I've been in a number of instructional design programs, and it's stuck in an academic way that doesn't connect really to how we need to perform. And so we really want to make sure that that's a high priority, that whatever we teach and share is directly applicable to people's own workplace. And really, one of the problems, and this is a big thing with training, is that there's never enough practice. And we want to make sure that that part of a good training program to develop new skilled designers is to also provide a supportive practice place to that and continuing support. So those are the things that we really were trying to carry across our effort as we're thinking, how can we really make a formal academy that can be directed toward improving the design skills and production skills of people in the e-learning space and beyond, across the whole training thing. Ellen, if we could, yeah, so in that effort in the academy, we're going to have several different colleges of focus on sort of the management, on some gaming design sort of things, on evaluation, on broader skills. But our first college is that we're really focusing on is the instructional design area. And our first really full program is called the Allen Certified Instructional Professional. And we are well on our way in running several cohorts through. And it's a level 1 credential, so it's sort of an entry place, but it takes you to a really skilled part of being able to develop e-learning. That is our hope with this procedure. So it has 4 courses in it currently in our first credential, and we're going to be giving you a little preview of 2 of those today. We open with a designing interactivity course, and I want to make sure that you realize that we're not starting with instructional design. We're starting actually with a broader idea of interactivity, which I think a lot of instructional design stuff misses the boat on. It talks so much about process and so forth, and never gives a chance for learners to figure out what is really a good example of interactivity, which is at the core of any good learning. And so we start with that and do a lot of exploration of examples to figure out what are the elements that make interactivity instructional. And then we followed up with our building course, which is taking one of the tools. So far, we have really focused on storyline. Our plans are to also do a parallel sort of offering with Captivate, those being the most prominent tools in use. But so often that people take our training in interactivity, they say, I get it, I want to do this, but my tools, I don't know how to use the tools to do that. And so our building instructional interactions course is really sort of not introducing the tool, but expecting that you've got some basic knowledge, but revealing aspects that you might not have figured out on your own. And those that are developers find particularly useful in building the kind of instructional interactivities that we're wanting to develop and learning requires. Then once that's under our belt, we have the advanced class, which now we really do start talking much more about instructional design, getting into learning theories, how different content requires different sort of experiences, and more process issues and so forth. And then all these three things add together to prepare us for the 4th experience, which is the capstone project, which is sort of a practicum where you are going to work applying everything we've learned in the first 3 courses to a project of your own choosing. And it involves coaching, individual coaching with an instructor. So you get a number of hours of working that. We have additional team meetings to share progress. But the idea is to have a way to really make sure this is coming back to your own work environment and figuring out how to apply it there. So at any rate, that's our whole, this first credential. There's our badge you see on the side that you will earn by completing this. So,
Ethan,
yes.
We had one great question coming in from Angela. So Angela completed the ATD e-learning instructional design certificate course last year. And as some attendees might know, we were involved with ATD on developing and delivering that course for several years. So Angela was wondering, how similar is this to what we were doing when we were involved with that program?
Well, the 101 course has a great deal of overlap. It's been reworked and new structure and new exercises, but it does deal with some of the similar concepts of really getting down to the roots of context, challenge, activity, and feedback, and some of those really key valuable components of design. So there's some overlap. It's not the same, but you would be familiar with some of the content if you were to take this course.
Gotcha. So the first course has some overlap, but Design 101 or 102, 103, and 104 are kind of go beyond that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We can come back to that too at the end of the hour with our full Q&A.
Yeah.
But for now, let's talk a little bit more about that first course, Designing Interactivity.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to just share some ideas here. It's just a little, sort of a little preview of what the experience is like, and the kind of things we talk about. Um, so our course is designing interactivity. Oh wait, you're seeing my, I need to swap displays, I think. Is this right now? Yeah,
Yes.
there we go. Okay. Yeah, so some real critical points about interactivity that hopefully these are not a surprise, and yet they don't get talked about as much. A lot of e-learning is built as if these things don't matter. But first off, learners remember what they do, and so the activities that we are creating online are just completely important to determine what are people going to take away from this. And so when people are hitting A, B, C, D as their actions, we're sort of telling them, this is trivial and irrelevant to the world, because nowhere in the world do we actually have to do that. The second point is telling isn't teaching. Learners need to be actively involved. Sitting passively listening to things or having words flow over them doesn't really create too much deep learning. And then finally, adults, and actually all learners, but adults in particular, because it's most of who we have to deal with, they have different needs. And so when we create a fixed training program that works identically for everybody, already we're missing the boat on how we can both address individual needs and hope that we have some good performance change. So, and as this slide says, too often the focus of instructional design is just writing content and laying out screens, but it isn't so much what the designer's doing, it's what the learner is going to do that's going to be critical, and that is where the interactivity comes in. So I just want to spend a few moments showing what we mean by interactivity and how tiny changes can transform a stale interaction into something that is really great. So here's a very typical interaction. It should not be surprising, and it would not be, in most circumstances, nobody would criticize you for having created this. This is taken from a course content that we did a few years ago about security. And so you can imagine that prior to this, there were several pages of content describing what are the security procedures. And now we have a knowledge check. And it's about employee security in the workplace. You have a responsibility to promptly address employee behavior that poses a threat to others. Which of these statements represents the most immediate threat to workplace safety? A, an expression of frustration with the ordinary office environment, criticism of team members, a threatened act of violence, expression of personal and emotional distress, or an expression of irritation with friends or family members. Well, I'm going to say it's criticism of team members, and no, there's a higher ranking concern. And that's it. It's a very, very typical question, but I would pose that this is a terrible instructional interaction. There's very little way to learn from it. Even if I were having just read the content, it's likely I would have been using only short-term memory and not really thinking about application. So what do we need to do instead? Well, what we have found in our work is that there are 4 really essential components to make interactions work. The first one, well, I already sort of told you what's good and bad about that interaction. I want to make sure I did this last time and we lost too much time, but the problem is it doesn't make you think. It's just rote behavior. It's not memorable. It doesn't suggest how it changes your behavior. So what we might do instead is think, how can we apply components to make it better? Well, one of the first thing that it's lacking in context. There's a rich environment in which security plays itself out in the workplace. And we as a designer maybe envision that, but a learner who isn't familiar isn't going to have any idea what that means. And so one of the critical things you can do is provide a framework for the interaction, tie it in some way to the performance environment, and provide relevance and meaning in the real world. Well, what do we mean by that? So what I've done in our example here is taken this exact same content and just added piecemeal an element. So what does it look like if that question were made in context? So it's exactly the same content. You have a response that we promptly address, and these are exact same choices: threatened act of violence, expression of frustration. And there's many, many ways you could add context, but simply by putting it into a work office environment and attaching these statements to a person, which this is the simplest thing in the world to do, I hope you can see how this has really transformed this into a much better question. Now, could it be better? Of course, and we'll show how it could be, but even that tiny difference of, instead of having this laid out like this is, I haven't changed a single word. All we've done is added context. It suddenly is undeniable that that it's relevant to the learner. And so if we make a choice here, it's incorrect. So it still isn't great. We're not getting great learning, but at least it has much more meaning. So the first step always is to create context. Now, once we have context established, our next step is to add challenge. Interestingly, one way to make interactions much better is make them a little bit more difficult. If I don't have to pay the slightest bit of attention to the screen or to what I'm doing, I won't be engaged. And without engagement, it's nearly impossible to create any sort of lasting memory. And so, interestingly, the way that you can increase the interactivity is to make sure that the challenge that the learner cares about and that they will be engaged in. So, the challenges require some attention, some motivation, to apply some intention, some risk, so that any of these things might force the learner to actually attend and be mindful of whatever responses they do. The worst thing in the world you want is to have people complete your e-learning thoughtlessly. And I think if we would look at a lot of the examples that are out in the world, that's exactly how learners are proceeding. So what does it mean in our little example to make that into to add a challenge? And we're going to add things one by one. And here all we did was, instead of just stating content, we put actual words in each person's mouth. This isn't a terrible challenge, but I can't just remember rotely the phrases from the content. I have to read, "My boyfriend was so late getting to the movie, I wanted to kill him," and think, okay, well, how does that relate to the sort of things that we were talking about as workplace securities? Is that something that threatens others in the workplace? Well, no, it doesn't. And so that's not likely to be the right choice. And so even that little thing, it creates challenge. There's many more ways you can do it. You can make it more game-like. There might be some consequences. But here, if I get this, I'll pick the right answer, I think, this time. And sure enough, I got it right. And so that's a tiny way of adding challenge. And then in the course, we talk about the many, many richer ways to add challenge when you're building an interaction. So there's our 2 steps. And now we're going to say, well, what could we add more to that to make it even better? Well, the next thing to be concerned about is activity, or what I like to say is action. What action are you going to have the learner take? And this is really critical, as one of our underlying principles was that people remember what they do. And so the action in typical questions is press A, press T or F, click a button. Now, none of those things have actual real meaning in the real world. What we would like to do, and this is sort of what fuels sort of the interest in simulations and games, is that in general, in those kind of applications, you're doing something. You're taking an action that is simulated, but it feels like you're actually taking charge of something. What you really want to try to avoid is what I call generic responses that could be extracted and plopped into any other lesson without any change, like next, hitting the next key, or hitting A, B, C, or D. They have no integration into the world that you've just created through the context and challenge. So what does that look like when we look at our little example? Again, our course explores this in lots of different ways, and this is just a very modest way of adding an activity. But actually, if we look back to the challenge one again, I don't really do anything. I just read these phrases and then click on one to decide, is that the choice? So if I go and say, how can we make that a better activity? Now I have to go around and actively listen. So the people that are on the little yellow discs have something to say. So I roll over my cursor, then I can read them. But even that little change creates intention on the learner's part, and that in turn creates interest. So I have to go and, hey, my action is to listen in, and that parallels what I need to do as supervisor. Not that I'm going to eavesdrop, but I have to be attentive. I have to pay attention to things that might not be on the surface. And then my action is, instead of just clicking, I need to take the person who I think is at risk and bring them into my office so we can have a little conversation. And again, you're not going to physically drag the person, but you are going to take action and say, I'd like to have a meeting with you. And so that action in the e-learning does a tiny bit to help reinforce that idea of that you're responsible, and there are ways that this lesson is going to help you figure out what to do. Okay, so there we have context. That's putting us in the office. The challenge is making you attend to things to figure out what's going on. The action is actually doing things in the lesson that have some tighter connection with the real performance than just the static ABCD sort of feedback. And then finally, our last, I'm sorry about all this flipping, but I have to go in and out of windows, and PowerPoint doesn't let you jump very quickly to other applications. So there we have context, challenge, activity, and then our last component is feedback. And we learn most effectively when we make mistakes. And too often our focus on design is just judging, saying you're right or wrong, when really our focus ought to be more on creating useful information. We want to reflect back to the learner how well they're doing and show the consequences, so that we, and actually it's a really great place to deliver content. Too often we put content all up front and people don't read it. And we sort of know that people read very poorly. But if I've engaged in interaction, make a mistake, and then you tell me what I should have known, that really increases the likelihood of someone's going to read that for meaning. So what would our final piece look like if we focused on the feedback rather than just saying it's incorrect? So let's try our feedback version. So notice these are additive. We've got all the things in place. But I need to pay attention and know that these things make a difference. So let's take our person who's going to, we think is committing suicide or threatening it as our risk, rather than this guy is the one who's most pressing because he's going to threaten other employees. But let's say I overlook that, or I think this person is more pressing, so I'll bring her to my office. And the feedback is what we call intrinsic feedback. It isn't dependent on words. It's actually showing the consequence of getting this wrong is that guy could go ahead and blow things up because we did not identify the most pressing threat. Now there's more you could say here, and you'd want to say what the rules are, but I just wanted to sort of simply illustrate what we mean by these four components. And so you can see in this last example, well, think about how different the experience here is from this experience. And you can see that the individual steps to get there were quite reasonable. And part of what we do in our Design 101 class is really spend time making it possible that you can come up with these kind of designs. Because I hope you can see what a ridiculous difference it is between presenting a learner with this versus presenting a learner with this. Okay, that's a little preview of the Design 101. I'm gonna get set up to switch over to Design 102. Are there some questions that we should be thinking about answering?
Yeah, I think some of these might be a little better to answer in the Design 102 section that's coming up right now. But
Okay.
we did get one question from Mary, and I feel like this is a really, really relatable question these days. Mary says, my team develops in Captivate because Flash will no longer be supported by the end of the year. Many of the interactions are not HTML5 compliant, so like rollovers. Mary was wondering, how do you build interactivity within HTML5? And maybe you could answer this specifically with Storyline.
Yeah, well, my experience is much greater with Storyline in that you can output your design in HTML5. And so you can design using the standard sort of elements that Storyline makes possible. And then when you choose to output it, you instead of packaging it as a Storyline, you can package it as HTML. I mean, it makes a few compromises when it has to, but it does a really remarkable job at maintaining the functionality. I think there's that capability in Captivate as well. And so what we've been doing is, if it's sort of standard level interactivity, we build in Storyline and publish. We do have sort of a high-end development part of our work as well. And so if things are really highly customizable, we have developers who program directly in HTML5. But for most mid to a little bit elevated interactivity, you can do it pretty well in Storyline and Captivate. And so we rely on that.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, maybe we can come back to that after you've gone through the Storyline portion. I do have one other question that kind of came in on the back channel, and that is about the CCAF framework that you just went through. And the question is, how is the CCAF framework, the Context Challenge Activity Feedback Framework, related to the idea of push versus pull learning?
Well, it's very much now. These jargon things, and then you start talking about, I don't want to speak incorrectly about it. It's very much learner-centered in that instead of pushing out the content, regardless if somebody wants it, the interactions allow the learner to pull or get the kind of feedback and messages that is triggered by the choices they make through the interactivity. So what we really try to do is we have a test then tell approach, which doesn't mean test to get a score, but put the learner to work right away. And then based on the choices and the questions and the actions they take, have that decide what information is going to be flowing to them. So everybody gets a customized sort of adaptive presentation based on their particular interests and choices.
Okay, sounds good. I think that's all the questions for now. Mary has another follow-up question, but we'll get to that in a couple minutes. I think it'll fit better with the development side of the things that you're about to talk about.
Okay. So anyway, the next bit, I just want to show a little bit what we mean by covering elements that are necessary to create CCAF sort of interactions that are not necessarily the default sort of way that the authoring tools work. Again, hopefully you have some knowledge of Storyline. If you don't, I think what I'm doing, it'll be clear, even though you may not have known the precise maneuvers, but our intention is to have this exact same sort of type of training be in Captivate as well. So I wanted to, playing off of our the example we were just looking at, I wanted to deal with a couple issues that can be really annoying. One of the things, the great things about context is it puts someone into this alternative world, and the strength of that is how compelling it is. But if you've ever used the free-form objects to create interactions in Storyline, which is a great way to do it. It does such wonderful work for you. You sort of end up, though, with these pre-built feedback messages. And these are completely out of context. And so it's really a shame, because you go to all this work to build context, and then as soon as somebody makes a mistake or answers a question, suddenly you're slapping them across the face with saying, you maybe thought this was interesting, but it's not. And so one of the things that we would like to do is to change those. Now, there is an option that you can customize exactly what your feedback messages look like. But again, that's for every single question in your story is going to be the same. And sometimes if you build custom interactions, you want to have custom feedback that matches them differentially. So this is sort of an interesting thing. Notice that these layers, incorrect, try again, and correct, came because we used this free-form object to create it. And so down here at the bottom, you can type in what message is going to be superimposed over those feedback messages, but you can't really change the basic nature of them. But you actually can. And the way you do that, and it's a little backward, but if we just delete the layers that were created for us. So I'm going to delete incorrect. Yeah, we'll get rid of that. Delete try again, and we'll delete correct. Now, if we go back to form view, we no longer have those messages because it knows that there's nothing there. And so we have to do something to replace it. But the trick is we create new layers that will have our custom content, but we just have to name them the same thing. So I'm going to create a new layer here, and I'm going to call it correct. But now I'm going to import a picture in here. So I'm going to import a picture from Media Library. And we have a little coach ahead of a guy that we're going to insert that image. We'll put him down here in this white space that we've got reserved for feedback. Sorry. There, and then I'm gonna put him down here. I'll make him a little bit bigger. Then I'm going to give him a speech bubble. And so we'll give a caption here. We'll make it oval and draw it there. And I'll bring his pointer over so it looks like he's saying this. And we will make it white inside. And then we can just type yes, a statement that threatens others is the top priority and must be dealt with first. Okay, that the text needs to become black so you can read it. And now this feedback will be coming for this question as our correct feedback. We could duplicate it and create another one called incorrect and say, perhaps you should review the standards for security threats. This is bad feedback, but I'm just in the moment doing it so we can see the places. And then we could do a final one that is our try again. The only trick here is you just have to type these exactly the way they were. And so try again. Oh, I didn't want that. I wanted a duplicate. Get rid of try again, and we'll duplicate incorrect. And that'll be try again. And we'll change the text in that one and say, read the choices and try again. So now, when we preview this, when I make a mistake, there I get my try again feedback. When I make the right choice, I get yes, a statement that threatens others. And so it's just a very simple insight that completely transforms your ability to use those freeform objects. So one little trick that you may not read right off the front. Now, the next thing I want to show is that when you have a screen like this, things can get pretty busy. Because when we look at our timeline, we've got a lot of objects. We've got the pictures of each person, we've got the speech bubbles, and if I really want to change this the way our example was, to have me, when I hovered over a person to show that, I'd have to hide all these and I have to have a lot of triggers on those things. And if I move something, it's likely to get screwed up. And so one feature that you can't use, I can't overemphasize the value of, and you probably have used this, but mainly for like showing a button turning up and down, but you can really use what we call states as a way to display content. So what I want to do is show how that works is, let's say we have this girl here and we want it so that, the way it should work is when I roll over it, we can see what she's saying, and then I should be able to click on her. And right now, and also if you do the rollovers, if you try to click on the text, that's different than clicking on the person, and it gets a little, it can be misleading. So we want that to be all one object, but manageable. So what I'm going to do is take our woman here, and we're going to look at her states, and we're going to edit the states. And in doing that, we can add additional states. And I'm going to add a new state, and this is going to be called, there are a number of built-in states, and there are also custom states. We're going to have a hover, so that when we move the cursor over her, we're going to have that speech bubble show up. So here's our hover state, and as we create states, you can have quite a few. They stack up along the bottom here. And I need to go and grab that speech bubble to make as part of this state. So I'm going to be done editing for a moment, so I can come out here and copy this, or actually I'm going to cut it. And then I'm going to go back into that state. And in that hover state, paste it. Oh, I made it. There's a mistake I make often just because I am thoughtless. Notice I just created a new version of that. I need to come back here and undo what I did. And I need to first edit the state. And in hover, I'm going to paste that speech bubble. So notice it is not affecting normal, it's only going into hover. And simply by doing that, I have gotten rid of an object on the screen. And when I preview this, now when I hover, I go over it, she speaks. When I go away, it's off. And so rather than just having those states to indicate a button being down or not, you can really have it to change the way your interactivity and your information is presented. So another really powerful, indispensable way of using storyline. And then finally, just one other little thing as a preview, and then we'll wrap up, is that one of the biggest problems when you have repeated content or repeated elements, if you ever have to change them, it's really hard to figure that out. For instance, we picked that we were going to use this guy as the coach. But let's say we get user testing and say, people don't like to have a coach that has a goatee. And so we have to go and figure out how to come up with a new image. And then we've got to hunt through all the slides and replace that. And there are features to help it, but it's just a big pain. Or if you want to move something and try to move it uniformly. So a really good design principle is, instead of repeating things, try to use one version of it that you can change dynamically. And so right now we've already created 3 versions of this speech bubble and coach. And so there's a lot of overhead possibly that we need to deal with. So again, states will come to the rescue on us. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy our coach and copy our speech bubble. And we are going to go to the timeline and paste this. All right, we need to go to the base layer, and I'm going to paste it. So now we've added those elements there, and what we want to do is just have the feedback change the state of this. I need to make this a little bit more streamlined, and so I'm going to take the speech bubble off, and with our coach, create states with him. And so we'll edit the states. And so now this object is, in a way, it's grouped. We've got multiple elements within that same why am I not pasting? Oh, there we go. Okay, so we now have created a object that is our coach. And because he's going to be there, there's ways that we could hide him, but for simplicity, I'm just going to give a instructions. Click on the statement that is the highest priority. Okay. My caps lock is nutty. Well, we're going to live with that because my keyboard screwed up. But now what we want to do is have additional states that reflect the different conditions. So I'm going to add another state that will be correct. Oh, I'm going to undo that a second. What we need to do is, it didn't take the speech. We're going to duplicate our state, and we'll call that correct. Well, sometimes storyline gets irritating that way. So we're going to add the speech bubble to our correct. And here we're going to say, oh, that, and then there's our good statement. Yeah, that's a statement that threatens others. Then we're going to duplicate this and create an incorrect. And this one will be no, check your references. And then we'll do one more that is try again. And this will be read, what did it say, try again, for time's sake. I don't know why my caps is so goofy. So now we have all the content right here in one object, and all we need to do is in each of these layers, I need done editing states. Instead of having correct be this thing, we're going to delete that. And all we need to do here is have a trigger that says we're going to change the state of, oh, I didn't name it. Dang it. Hold on, Hansel, will be done in just a second here. It's nerve-wracking to do this in front of people. Timeline, yeah, so we need to call this coach. So now we're set. When we're going to get rid of everything on the on our layer, but we're going to say have a trigger that says we're going to change the state of the coach when the timeline starts, which is the timeline for this layer. It's a timeline of layer correct starts. And so as soon as we say show that layer, it's going to say, let's switch what the coach is saying to correct. So then we can do the exact same thing with the other layers here. So incorrect, we're going to delete the caption and delete the picture. And instead, just have a trigger that says, let's change the state of coach. This time we're going to change it to incorrect when the timeline plays of incorrect, layer incorrect. And then finally, we got one little thing to do and we'll test it and we will be good to go. And try again. And we're going to get rid of the content we put in there. So now we have the value that we only have this coach in the lesson one time. We only have the speech bubble one time. So if we ever move it, we move it all places. And now we'll add that trigger to change the state of coach to try again when the timeline starts of try again. Okay, everybody see how that works now? We have no content anywhere but on the base layer, but the question, our preform question, is still going to trigger everything. So let's give it a whirl here. Now remember, we didn't fix all the speech bubbles, so only this woman is the one that's got a rollover. But if I click her, oh, you know what? I didn't. There's a little thing I didn't change, but let's pick these other people. So I got the correct one. Yes, a statement threatens others a top priority. Well, I shouldn't have done that one first. Let's replay. So I pick a bad one. I get try again. And I could exhaust this until I get incorrect. There I got all 5 choices and I got the incorrect. And you already saw how we got the correct one. So it's pretty slick. And if you go about building it that way, it's actually a lot easier. And it's so much more powerful to maintain by thinking of that. And so a subtitle for our 102 class could be making the most of states in storytelling, because what we're doing is almost always involved in a clever, not necessarily obvious way to use states. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show just as a little preview. We spend time in the class and you're building along with me. I go much slower and we talk about things. And then after we do an exercise like that, we often have a brain teaser that you work on your own that forces you to sort of stretch your understanding a little bit. And we found it's a really fantastically useful way to get people to learn some new software. So anyway, that's a preview, and Ellen's got some more information she wants to share with you, and we'll have some time to answer questions now.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Ethan. We have a couple questions that came up while you were going through that last section, and we'll get to those in a moment. But for now, just wanted to let everyone know that if you're interested in joining the program, our upcoming cohort, it starts on May 4th, which is Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. If you'd like to join an individual course, we are offering that option now. So if you sign up for a single course one at a time, our price is $14.95 per course. And then if you opt into the full program all at once, you're getting about a $200 per course discount on the individual courses. So the full program price is $49.95, and you have the option of paying that at registration or in monthly installments. But you are, of course, welcome to sign up for one course at a time.
Hey, Ellen, one thing I think we didn't mention is just to be clear, each of these courses is 6 sessions. They spread out over about 3 weeks. We meet twice a week online. And so it's more than just one session. I don't know if we mentioned that today.
Yeah, I think I typed it in chat, but it's a good thing to kind of recap. So each course, it's not just, a workshop where you're sitting in a webinar for 8 hours a day. We try to spread it out for a better learning experience for one, and also to give you time to think about the concepts, practice the storyline skills that you're developing, and so on and so forth. So as Ethan said, the typical format of the course is 6 sessions, each 2 hours long, of instructor-led material, and that's generally spread out over 3 to 4 weeks. And then if you are signing up for the full program, then you generally take each of those courses in succession with about a week gap in between each one. So if you're taking a single course, that's generally about 3 weeks long. If you're taking the full program from start to finish through the end of the practicum, that's about 3 months or so. So that's the length. You can go to allenacademy.com and register now to sign up for a full program or for a single course. Or you can email us at provost or provost. Ethan, is it provost or provost?
Provost is how
Provost. Sounds better. Provost@alleni.com, and let us know if you're interested. We also do private cohorts if you are looking to get big group training for your L&D team. And is there anything else that I'm missing, Ethan, before we go on to Q&A?
No, I think you covered it, and
okay.
You get to spend a few more moments with any questions that you collected.
Great. So I will come back to some of the questions that came up during our last little section. But if any of you who are still on the line have questions that haven't been answered, go ahead and type them in the chat window now, and we'll spend the next few minutes answering your questions as they get queued up. So I think the first question I want to come back to is really the topic that Mary brought up right before, right at the beginning of the Design 102 section. So, Mary mentioned that when you publish in Captivate, it flags what interactions aren't HTML5 compliant. And so one of the specific interactions that Mary mentioned was the rollover. So I'm wondering, if you weren't able to do a rollover for that particular interaction in the activity that you showed us, what might be an alternative if you were doing something that needed to be mobile compliant, for instance?
Yeah, well, and actually, isn't it just that it's, are you thinking of 501c compliance, 508 compliance? Because rollovers are possible in HTML5, but you can think about different ways. Is you could do a touch to reveal the exact information, and then you could touch that thing to register it, or touch another place to make it go away and have a new thing. So you could, in order to listen to those people, you could touch them to hear what they're saying. Click on those people, and then a speech bubble would show up, and then you could decide what to do with that speech bubble.
Gotcha. So like a tap or a long press if you were going to do it on mobile instead of a rollover.
Right. Another question that's sort of related, people often wonder, well, what about drag and drops? How are you supposed to do that in some environments that don't allow that? A good substitute for that is to click the object you want to move and then click where you want it to go to and then let the program move it. We had some work we did with a group that was doing point of sale terminal training. So there were no mouses, there were no keyboards, and so everything had to be on the screen. And yet they wanted to have that kind of interactivity, and so it worked really pretty well. We did a stockroom activity where you had to move all these shoes around to make sure they were in order, and you just picked the shoes you wanted to move, and then you pointed where you wanted to go, and it was completely accessible and HTML compliant and mobile compliant.
Okay, great. So we got a question in from Iwan, and I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. Do you discuss SAM in the course? SAM being the successive approximation model.
We do. We talk about it a little bit in the first course, just because it is so essential, the idea of doing rapid prototyping and review, that in our exercises and sketching, we need to take advantage of that. So we do talk about the underpinnings of it in the 101 class. We spend a little bit more time delving into a little more detail in the 103 class. And then a special SAM course within the academy is in the works and should be offered relatively soon. So if you really want to get into deep into SAM, we'll have a special program for that.
Okay, great. Okay, so another question. So in your experience, what are some factors that limit designers' ability or freedom to create e-learning like this? So if the example that you were showing where you've got a strong context, you've got a strong challenge, there's an activity that's meaningful and related to the performance, and then meaningful feedback that is aligned with what learners will see and hear and feel in the actual environment. What are some factors that limit a designer's ability